Well, hello, Internet. This is my first of many New Wave of British Heavy Metal reviews. Obviously, these records have been reviewed many times before, during the period which they were released, later on in anthologies. We're 35 years plus on the New Wave of British Heavy Metal movement, or NWOBHM as they call it. I've heard it called NWOBHM, whatever you want to call it. I'm going to go through and review what I own. I definitely don't own the most obscure stuff. I still see stuff I'd never heard of. Like I said, we're going to go in alphabetical order. There's bands like A to Z that I don't have, so obviously I can't review them, but we'll start with what I possess. And our first one going to be Avenger with the Too Wild to Tame CW On the Rocks 7-inch single from 1983 on, of course, Neat Records. Neat Records is well known, associated with acts like Venom, Tigers of Pantang, Blitzkrieg, Satan. They licensed the Satan records from Roadrunner, or at least the Court and the Act record back in '83. So this record here, interesting, is part of the unholy trinity of British heavy metal, which is, of course, Satan, Blitzkrieg, and Avenger. Comes from the Blitzkrieg album of the same title, Unholy Trinity, which we'll get to at some point. Great record. If you haven't heard it, I recommend you hear it. Obviously, you can tell from the Blitzkrieg poster in the background, I'm a huge Blitzkrieg fan. Great stuff. Check them out. The best way I can describe them, Deep Purple, but heavier. So this record, again, if you were part of it, if you played on it, you're part of the production, you were there back in the day, feel free to comment. If you played on this record, I'd love to pay for international phone time to speak with you and talk to you about the making of this record. But interesting, we'll just jump right to the back of it. It credits Ian Swift as vocals, but then goes on in the notes to say, oh wait, Brian Ross sang on this single. Brian Ross, of course, known for his time with Blitzkrieg, which he's still currently in. Satan, the classic era of Satan with Court in the Act. The later issued Live in the Act, the Blitzkrieg and Holland bootleg, and the current Satan stuff that's coming out. So, one other cool thing to note on this record, a couple things, before we get into actual music on the record, comes with the merchandise sheet, which, man, look at those prices. If only I could get that shit now at that price. I'm not sure who did this. It definitely looks hand done. I don't know if someone at Neat did it. If maybe Mick Moore or Gary Young has done it. But jumping right into the record. So obviously now we know that we have Brian Ross on vocals. Also credited John Brownless on guitar. It mentions in here Les, who I believe may have played the lead guitars, left Chapman. The name's escaping me, so you can correct me if I'm wrong on this. Of course, Mick Moore on bass, who would be a long-standing member of Avenger, going into, I think, the 2000s when they reformed. He's no longer a member. And then, of course, Gary Young. Interesting history here with Gary Young. Gary Young actually plays drums on the 10 Years of Blitzkrieg mini-album. And then also, of course, on the 10 album, 5 of those songs, which were originally on the 10 Years album. But jumping right into this, Too Wild to Tame is a very interesting song, and if we pull the label, which of course itself is interesting, this is when Neat was on white labels. If you follow Neat Records, you know they changed label colors over the years. The band's logo's on it. Taking a look at the song Too Wild to Tame, it credits Mick Moore and Brian Ross as writing it. And then on the Rocks, the B-side, it credits Steve Bird, Brian Ross, and Mick Moore. Interesting, Steve Bird was an earlier guitar player in the band. I'm not sure if he was involved in this record. I know he did a thing on One Take No Dubs with them on the song Hot and Heavy Express. But again, I'm not sure what his involvement, if any, was on this record. Like many other Neat records, recorded at Impulse Studios, which of course was the same building, 71 High Street, as Neat Records itself. So they own the studio, the record company did. But going into the song Too Wild to Tame, Too Wild to Tame was originally a Blitzkrieg song written back in 1981. And it can be found, if you want to hear how Blitzkrieg does this, on the 2003 A Time of Changes Phase 1 reissue, as well as the Boys from Brazil Street Volume 2 reissue. And they credit that recording to being done at Q Studios in Leicester. And that comes from the Mark II Blitzkrieg lineup. Famous for Blitz Alive, but again, we'll get into that in a different portion. So this version of Too Wild to Tame, great piece. I don't want to compare the Blitzkrieg to Avenger version, And a quick note before I forget, Blitzkrieg did re-record this actual song, Blitzkrieg did, in 2015 for the Time of Change's 30th anniversary release. And On the Rocks was re-recorded by Avenger on their first album, which would be Bloodsports. So going into this record, this is definitely a different version than the Blitzkrieg one. It's done a little bit differently. The recording quality on this, Neat Records did a pretty good job on their singles, in my opinion. Some of their albums are a little underproduced, which I think is well known. But overall, it comes across pretty good. It's not very stereodynamic. You're not going to put it in your headphones and get blown away. But the performances are really good. I mean, it's classic British metal, big riff, balls out, British metal. What more do you want? A little back history on this is, from what I've read in the liner notes from A Time of Change's Phase 1, done by John Tucker, who's a brilliant author on British heavy metal, has a great book, Neat and Tidy, about the history of Neat Records. Susie Smiled, another book about British heavy metal, and he's also done things with Brian Tutler of Diamond Head and Biff Biffle of Saxon. But going into this, dynamite drum work from Gary Young. He does a fantastic job. He's a great player. Talked to him a few times via the internet. Real friendly guy. But again, going into the Too Wild to Tame, it really is, balls out British heavy metal. You got that classic Brian Ross falsetto scream, opens it up. As soon as you hear that, you know who it is. You know what's going down. Just a great driving song. Typical kind of setup, verse, chorus, filler, bridge, verse, chorus. The B-side's a little different, and it's different from the album version, definitely. It's very straightforward from the album version. I'd say the album version is a little bit more flaunty, a little more shown off, but well executed on the single, on the B-side. On the Rocks, it's a very straightforward, what I would call Brian Ross song. Kind of, it has a feel of, again, it's going to be, intro, verse, chorus, bridge, verse, chorus, outro. Has those falsettos on every chorus, so if you're not big on the falsettos that happen in British heavy metal, very Ian Gillan style falsettos, may not be the song for you. But overall, it delivers. It's a great piece. It's very raw. The production on this isn't over the top like I've addressed. It's very minimal, straightforward, and just kind of sounds like it's real loud pressed to the vinyl. But overall, comes out great. Again, I suggest you pick it up. It's a great single, a classic. If you want to pick up the Too Wild to Tame anthology, which came out back in 2002 or 2003, that's basically an instant Avenger collection. Avenger now is still playing. They have an album called The Slaughter Never Stops. You should check it out. It's a fucking great record. CD, but anything around that's music on a disc is a fucking record. But check it out. It's great. It's brilliant. It's probably the best work Avenger's done on The Slaughter Never Stops. Not to down the single. This is classic, balls out, minimal production, raw heavy metal. Very much kind of the Kill 'Em All sound for everyone else. Just raw, straightforward, pounding down heavy metal with melodic vocals. So again, check it out. Avenger, Too Wild to Tame, CW, On the Rocks. Great 7-inch single, classic. Won't cost you a bunch of money to get it. You'll love it. Great piece of history.